Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. Or hear you. I've just been beatboxing here alone in my office. What was I here to do? Oh, that's right. I have a new episode of Micron to release for the first time in a really long time. This episode is all about something significantly different from all previous episodes. Hence, I'm foregoing the normal intro music for a decidedly more low-budget theme. Actually, if you look at the list of Micron's previous episodes, you'll notice that the most recent episode before this one came out almost 8 months ago, and the one previous to that came out about 6 months before that. I've been creating podcast episodes on a very slow, very sporadic schedule. Why? Mostly because I've been spending almost all of my time writing on Substack instead. If you've been on the internet at all recently, you have probably heard of Substack. Substack. It's all over the place. Everybody's talking about it. Well, that's for a pretty good reason, actually. It's because it's a pretty darn good content creation platform for writers, journalists, bloggers, and now podcasters. Yes, believe it or not, no matter what platform you are listening to this very episode on right now, it is actually being hosted and distributed by Substack. The Micron podcast is now brought to you by this exciting new writing platform that is taking the internet by storm. I'm not a salesman for Substack or anything like that, but in this episode, I interview Linda LeBrun, who actually works at Substack as the manager or director of writer partnerships. She wasn't very big into titles. A few weeks ago, Linda took a significant chunk of time out of her busy workday to talk to little old me, all about how Substack works, why content creators might want to look into Substack in the first place, how creators can use it to grow their audiences and make money doing what they love with the written word, and, as of very recently, with audio and video as well. And by the way, even if you're only a passive podcast listener or someone who enjoys reading blog posts or newsletters or articles that other people create, I highly recommend that you go to Substack.com today and create your own account, both so you can subscribe to people like me, of course, as well as many other creators, but also so you can create your own content. I think just about everybody should be writing or sharing audio or video. I highly recommend that you give Substack a shot, even if you have no experience doing anything online at all. Try it today. After all, it's free. If I were into cliches, I might say something like, without further ado, we'll get to the episode. But as a former member of Toastmasters, I know we're not supposed to say, without further ado, so I won't say that. Let's just get right onto the podcast where I interview Linda from Substack. I hope you like it, and I hope you're inspired to create your own Substack account and make content, whether that's a podcast or an email newsletter or a blog or whatever, just like me. I hope you find this helpful and inspiring. Thanks for listening. Hi, Linda.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for making the time.
Absolutely.
How about we just dive in? Does that work for you?
That would be wonderful. I know only a little about you. I listened, of course, a little bit to your podcast and looked at your Substack, but I would love to, just get into it, answer your questions, and maybe get to know you a little bit better. But yeah, let's go.
Awesome. And what is your position at Substack?
My only title is Writer Partnerships, and the job that I do relates to the acquisition and development of writers and creators and podcasters on the Substack platform. So a lot of my job is reaching out to people who may be book authors, or they may be creating content somewhere else on the internet or in the world in general. And we might think that they could be a match for the Substack model and would like to tell them about it. Because we're a startup, we still go out and sort of have to one by one invite people to come on. So that's a big part of my job. And another part of my job is writer development. So for writers already on the platform, if they have been successful and are building businesses of meaningful size, often they want to talk to people on my team and how can they do it better, best practices and things like that. And the last piece of it is different people on the writer partnerships team specialize in different verticals. And the vertical that I spend the vast majority of my time on is finance, investing, macroeconomics and business writers and creators.
Nice. Okay, so you're good with math.
Yes. Yeah,
I would
that's a
imagine so.
big part of it.
Okay. Well, so on that note, I guess I'll just be honest and say I heard about Substack a couple years ago. I don't remember. You could tell me how long the platform's even been around. But my first thought was, oh, goody, yet another platform. It was like, okay,
Right.
one more thing to sign up for. I think somebody sent me a link to something that they were writing, and it said, "Do you want to create an account?" And I was like,
That's
no,
the
no,
last thing I want to do is create an account. Yeah.
no more accounts, no more usernames and passwords, no more logins. And what is this thing called Substack? And is that related to Stack Overflow or, what's the deal with that, right? Because I work in web development.
Yes. Mhm.
Stack Overflow is a great resource for people who need coding help. So anyway, so what's the Substack thing? But then what happened was I signed up for a writing course, a
Oh.
writing community with a guy named Tim Denning in Australia.
Mhm.
Fun guy, great course. And a whole bunch of the writers in there were like, "What's your Substack?" And I was like, "I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean?" They said, well, we're all writing in Substack." And I thought, oh,
Ah.
great, that platform again. Okay. So finally I got into it. And the thing that shocked me, it was unbelievably simple. I could not believe how easy it was. And there were so many tools. And I was thinking like, okay, well, so if I'm writing, I'll bet you they probably don't have this feature. And then I click around and
Mhm.
I found it. And I was like, oh,
Oh, isn't that
nice.
great?
Oh,
Good.
they have that. Okay. Well, they probably don't have this feature. Oh my goodness, they have that too. And I was just shocked at how much it was very apparent that it was a tool by content creators for content creators, for, lack of a better way to describe that.
Mhm.
The point being, sometimes you find a tool and you think like, okay, so I see what they were trying to do here, but they've clearly never used this before.
Mm.
Because if they have, they would know that when I click this button, what I expect to happen is this. My experience with Substack has been the opposite of that. It's been, okay,
Ah,
I'll bet you
good.
what I want to do right now is I want to do this. Where's the feature for that? Oh, there it is. Wow,
Mhm.
they thought about that. And it's clear because they're using it, which is fantastic. But I guess my first question would be, what is the problem, succinctly if possible? What's the problem Substack is trying to solve?
Mhm. It's easier if I
Sure.
say the problem it was invented to solve. 7 years ago, these three founders got together. They met at a tech company they were all working at. It was two engineers, Chris Best and Jayraj Sethi. They are today the CEO and CTO, which is Chief Technical Officer of Substack. They are both are software developers. And the third is Hamish McKenzie, who
Mhm.
is a former journalist, and he is the chief writing officer. And the problem they set themselves to solve was that journalism was in disarray. The business models of journalism had been dissolved by the internet like a nail in acid. And the journalists and writers they knew were having sustainability of their incomes. They had extreme economic precarity. So their idea was, and they went up and down to all the VC offices saying this, if you could create a way that people with the proverbial 1,000 true fans, Kevin Kelly had this concept of, you have 1,000 true fans and they pay you, that is a living. So
Mhm.
if somebody who's non-technical can have a blog/email newsletter and charge people money, and if they can charge those 1,000 true fans $5 or $7 or $10 a month, then that is a living. They can do what they wish completely independently, and no one can ever yank that away. That was their concept. It was to give, initially, it's evolved from this, but initially was to give writers the ability to establish independent incomes. And of course, then if somebody wants to come and have a free blog, have a free email newsletter, express themselves to the world, that all works. But the thing that Substack didn't invent, neither blogging nor email, the
Mhm.
kernel that was different was to easily create a single holistic package where you could go set up in a couple of hours and I have a writing business and just take it from there. And they had nothing but disbelief that this could ever be
Okay.
a business model. And Chris Best tells the story all the time of how people found it. So if that could work, it would have worked, is number one. And number two,
Mhm.
that that there's just nobody will pay. Everybody has decided writing is commoditized and nobody will pay. But
Mhm.
the problem Substack set out to solve, which I think all of us who work there would say it's on its way to solving, it was the economic problem for people who, if you want to say create content. A lot of writers don't like this sort of content characterization, but a lot of the finance and business people I work with don't have a problem with the term content. But for writers, the ability to go direct, that's it. You don't need a gatekeeper. You don't need somebody to hire you. You don't need
Mhm.
somebody else to hand you a platform. You can create your own.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, because part of the problem in years past, I think, was you see content creators online, and then it's like, okay, well, if you like what they're doing, support them on Patreon, or
Hmm.
what's that other one? Buy me a coffee or something like that. And
Yes.
those are all good and fine, but yeah, so clearly there are these discrete tools that everyone's trying to put together, which is like subscribe to my WordPress, blog here. And then, if you like what we're doing, click this link and then give us a donation. And then it can be a one-time donation or recurring donation. But the point there being the creator has to pick and choose and say, I'll open an account here and connect it to this here and connect it to this here. So
Hmm.
sounds
Hmm.
like Substack was saying, let's put it all in one and make it seamless and smooth. And it sounds like make it so that anybody can use it. You don't have to be a developer, or a professional
Yeah.
content creator who's done this for a very long time to figure it out, right?
Yes. And then the last bit is so key because, Ron, a lot of people like you, if I talk to them about Substack, they say, well, why do you even, this is like the Hacker News I could build in a weekend thing, right? Well, why do you need Substack when you could just have a WordPress instance and then integrate
Mhm.
Stripe and then do, simple paywall pro and paywall your content and then integrate a subscription solution. Like all these bits that you can put together
Mhm.
always did exist and still exist. There are lots of people doing lots of publications that are not on Substack. But what didn't exist was something that just worked out of the box and allowed you to charge money on a recurring basis. And I don't think anybody at Substack would disagree. Patreon was a major precursor that was brilliant in the way that it said. So what was, in a sentence, what was Patreon's thing? Patreon's thing was people will find out about you somewhere else on the internet, and they will look at your art, they will listen to your podcast. And then at the moment when you're asking them to pay you and support you, you are going to have them come over. So now we have some friction. You're going to have
Sure.
them come over to Patreon, and it's sort of at the time they have integrated more branding for the creator now, but at the time it's like it's very Patreon branded, and now you got to the at the very moment I'm ready to pay, I have to make a Patreon account, right? And
Hmm.
and then I can pay you. So, but however, just the idea of getting a creator to get money in their pocket directly, that was a great innovation, very different than a lot of other places like the traditional social media, something like Twitter, which was like, well, if you set up a certain kind of account, we'll pay you some money and
Hmm.
we'll let just keep checking your accounts, and
Exactly.
you don't this is the other thing, ownership. You don't own anything.
Mhm.
So on Substack, you own the content, you own the email addresses. That was something that I think they did at the outset, that at the time it hadn't been done, where there was always this idea of like, well, if you come and write on our platform, we're going to own the content together, and we'll kind of, okay, you're going to get some pay and you're going to get some ownership, but by and large, we want to make sure we keep you. So the important thing is that we have to, like, this is going to be a marriage. It's a permanent partnership where we're chained to each other. And if you ever even think of leaving this platform, if you leave Twitter, do you get to export your Twitter followers? No, that's comedic.
Right.
But Substack's promise is, look, if you do want to pick up and leave Substack someday, you will bring with you your content, your email addresses, and indeed the payment relationships, since those are in Stripe. So those are some things that were different
Hmm.
than the Patreon idea, or even we could talk about the Medium idea. Medium was, you're going to get paid, but it was
Hmm.
very much not direct drive and not ownership of the audience, and they never represented to be. It was just a different model.
Well, I'm glad you pivoted to Medium because that was another thing. So I signed up for Medium, I think right when it came out, immediately when it came out, however many years ago that was. And I couldn't quite figure that out either. I thought, okay, so this is kind of like a blogging platform, sort of. There's a social element to it also. But and then there was the partner program, and I'm laughing because I think I just gave up because they changed it so many times where it was like,
Hmm.
if you want to monetize your Medium account, here's what you do. You sign up for this, and then you have to pay us every month, and then you get to be a part of this program, and then we'll share revenue with you. But then you get to decide, okay, I want you to monetize this post, but not this post. But then when you do that, you have to like paywall them. So then,
Hmm.
you got to bring in new users, and they can only see so many free articles per month or something like that. And then it was like, okay, well, now just kidding. Everybody's a partner, and either you're in or you're out, and it's $50 a year or something like that. And the point is, like, it changed so many times that I just
Hmm.
gave up. I thought, like,
Hmm.
so what is the plan here? Like, how do you become a successful writer on Medium? And I don't think they knew either. I think like it was very clear they're trying out one model and then said, okay, well, that didn't work. So now let's try another one. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try another one. And then, through a couple of different CEOs, that the direction has shifted left and then right and then left and then right, or,
Yes.
up and down or whatever. So clearly there's a secret nut like they're trying to crack, and I don't think they found it. And it's funny because I checked my stats. um, the amount of money that I've made in the Medium Partner Program over the years, and I never took it seriously. But it was more of an experiment, just like, where's this platform going? What's it doing? I made 35 cents one month and 38 cents another month, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because I kept turning off the paywall on the post because I thought like, well, either everything's in or everything's out. Anyway, so it was interesting to see all that. And then Substack, I found that, and then I said, okay, well, this seems a little bit more. They've really thought this through, and there's a plan and there's a strategy behind it. And the big thing that you mentioned, you can take your audience with you, which why is everybody, I mean, maybe this is an obvious question, but why is every other brand out there absolutely dead set against that? Facebook, Twitter, Medium, all the platforms, YouTube, you want to take your emails and your users and your subscribers and go somewhere else. They either don't let you or make it as hard as possible. And yet Substack has said, okay, you want to do that? Fine. How's that possible?
When I came to Substack 3 years ago, I had people who worked in tech, friends, tell me flat out, Substack will never work because you let people leave too easily. You charge a 10% platform fee. Nobody is going to come to Substack and make $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year and pay you that much money. They will just leave. These predictions were made so confidently that people will leave. And that's why all the other platforms don't let you leave. The first reason is they think that being able to lock you in is a precondition of being able to grow, because they say, well, bar all the exits and let's get as many people in the theater as possible. And that is how we are going to have success. And we've got to make sure nobody can leave. The second reason, which is an incentives reason, and incentives explain everything, is because their business model is based on advertising. Again, they don't represent anything otherwise. It's very clear that Twitter's business model is mostly based on advertising. They've tried to pivot a little bit to, you pay and then people are going to pay you and all this other stuff. Fundamentally, it's something like a Facebook, a Instagram, YouTube, they're advertising based businesses. So why would they ever let anybody who's a writer or creator or anything on them? Basically the purpose of both the creators and the viewers' audience is just to be there to look at advertising. So the minute they say, okay, you can move your audience, like that's just, it's not fundamentally what it's about. So there was this, I think, tremendous skepticism of being, now, okay, you always could have an email list on Aweber, Constant Contact, MailChimp. You always could have an email list, and that you totally own and you could carry it anywhere. Okay. This is, so on one side, we have social media where I'm trying to build an audience, build a reputation, get visibility, discovery, reach. That's one extreme. And then the other extreme is I can build my email list. Maybe I can try to funnel people from social media to my email list so I can actually own them. But hey, Weber, Constant Contacts of the world, they certainly never said they're going to help anybody to see your stuff. They're just, you totally own it. You can bring it wherever you want. It's your list. So there was never any idea. Anybody who wanted to make a big scaled social media platform, it just would not be a match with their incentives to be able to ever let people move or leave. So, and you have seen, Ron, Substack writers and creators, that it's a great project of theirs to say, okay, I have 20,000 LinkedIn people who follow me, and how can I get them to come on over to my Substack? And this is kind of, it's a slog, because LinkedIn, just like all these other ones we've mentioned, has no interest whatsoever in letting you. And LinkedIn is not advertising based, but they are, because they're a jobs platform. Their constituency is recruiters, HR people. Again, it's that kind of 90s term of eyeballs. They just, if you are on LinkedIn, you're doing a newsletter, people are interacting with it. All you are is stuff to go in between the corporate content and the jobs content. So all of it goes back to what is the incentive of the platform. And I think what the Substack founders had in mind was, we are going to be not exclusively is wrong, because it's not really a model of exclusionary. I'm sure, you've seen the odd Substack where somebody will put some sponsorship, somebody will put an ad, and that's fine. But the drive of what we, the founders at that time, were building is that it would be motivated by helping writers and content creators actually earn money. So the other thing is, think of some of the people who are on Substack who are very high profile people, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Margaret Atwood and Adam Grants of the world. They would be disinclined to come if the promise were, well, you can work hard and build something up here, and then we're partnered together forever and we're married and we're chained to each other. Those people are all far more likely to come and to have paid subscription publications if they are secure in the knowledge that we are in a partnership, that they have a lot of power, because if they are dissatisfied or feel they're not getting their money's worth, or feel the fees are not worth it, they can leave. And most have stayed. So the only way that you prove your value proposition, I think, is if you say that, you can fire Substack.
Right. That's a good point. Well, so maybe on a similar note, one thing that has happened recently, and I think this is new, and this is how you and I got connected in the first place, was I have a podcast, and it's a very small podcast, and it's just me, right? And that's my whole pitch. So the Micron show it's a microphone and Ron. That's it. It's just a one-man podcast about small experiences, little things in life, people I meet, conversations I've had, experiences, that sort of thing. But so all of a sudden with Substack, now they're saying, they being you, hey, podcasters, we also want podcasters. Now that's very different than an email newsletter, right? And knowing that, and I did switch my podcast from Anchor to Substack. And again, I could not believe how simple it was. I redirected my feed, I plugged it in, and I hit, publish, and I thought, yeah, right, we'll see what happens. I came back the next day, all the episodes were there, all the, the cover art was there, the links were correct, the episode names were right. I could not believe that. But now I've got this, so I have a bit of a challenge, and I'm struggling to understand. Maybe you can help me. What is the difference now between Substack, the newsletter platform, plus now there's podcasts, and how do you differentiate between, here I am, Ron Stauffer, the Micron podcast, but also I can write a newsletter. Like, how do you differentiate that, especially when you throw in the fact that now you can do voiceover audio on your written content? What's the difference between when you write the things that you're writing versus the podcast episodes that you're making? I don't exactly know how to decide, this is worthy of a newsletter, this is worthy of a podcast episode. And am I asking people to subscribe to my podcast or my Substack, or both? Long question. Open to your thoughts.
No, this is a great question that I think is it's pertinent because Substack is not yet fully appreciated as a podcasting platform. When I say appreciated, I just mean known. I think people, when I am talking to people about Substack or pitching, they're like, oh, I like Substack. I like Heather Cox Richardson. I get some emails. But sometimes I've even had the experience of saying to somebody who's been on Substack for a long time, you can do podcasting and upload video. And they're like, oh, I didn't really know that you had that. So I think we as Substack employees overestimate how much people are going to be looking through the features of the product with a fine-tooth comb, which of course one does not do. When I'm using any other product, I'm not necessarily, aware of all the bells and whistles it may have. So some of the bells and whistles that we have made over the past 2 years is just what you were describing, Ron, where we have created podcasting features that make it very easy to re-platform your podcast from other hosts to be hosted on Substack. I think the best, so I'll answer the technical part briefly first, and then I'll talk about the strategic part, because when you talk about what deserves to be in text, what ought to be in audio, it's kind of strategy. It's kind of very personal, and it's part of the creative process. But the technical part is, it's best to just think of your Substack as a Substack. And within that publication, what do we have? We have a publication page, and it will have posts that we do. And those posts can be of different types. It can just be a traditional when you do a traditional Substack text post, you can embed audio and video in it. Or you can do what's called an episode. When you see the new post drop-down menu, one of those is called episode. And that is a podcast episode where you are uploading an MP3 or other audio file, and it's actually a podcast. And for people listening who might want to do that, it's a one-time setup. If you want to take that podcast, it's an RSS feed setup where you can set it up that it sends it to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other podcasting platforms. Do that one time. And now when you upload to Substack, it goes out to all the other platforms. So somebody may never get an email from you or go to your Substack URL on their browser, but they may be seeing your work in the proverbial wherever you listen to podcasts. And I mentioned that because I think some people think Substack, oh, it's this closed system. If I have a podcast on Substack, then it's just a podcast on Substack. No, podcasting is, I mean, this is the great thing about RSS, which is it's not a platform. It's, it's something that's existed on the internet as a way of sharing content. So think of the Substack as like one big thing. And then you can have your text post, your audio post, that's a podcast episode. You can have a video post. And similarly, if you upload a video, you can set it up on Substack such that only the audio part of that video goes out through RSS to the other platforms. So even by the sort of details I'm giving here, you can see we've chopped a lot of wood in the past 2 years, with the idea being that people on Substack who were publishing written content really liked the ability it gave them to have independent incomes, charge money for things. And they might also have a podcast. They might also have video content they wanted to bring it on Substack. And the center of Substack being the ability to paywall content, the ability to have things that are just for the community of people who's supporting you financially. Everything I've just mentioned, you can have it for free or paid. So I can have a video where I post the whole thing for free. I can post the whole thing and have it all behind the paywall. I can also have a video where it's an hour long. Only paying people can see the whole hour, but people who are signed up for free can see the first 2 minutes. That has been, as you can imagine, a very powerful conversion tool. Or if you have, say, a podcast episode, you can have 2 versions of it. I'll give an example. So Andrew Sullivan has the Dishcast on Substack, long-standing Substack podcast, and he will upload for his paying subscribers. There's I think the last time I was looking at it, he had like an hour-and-a-half episode for paying subscribers. And then for free subscribers, he had 45 minutes or an hour. So he is deciding, it could be 2 minutes for free, an hour for paid, or it could be a really full episode for people who are free subscribers, but then it's the super fans who are supporting him in pay. He wants to give them that extra. So sometimes people are like, okay, well, what's the reason I would move if I'm on Anchor, I'm on Podbean, I'm on any other, and it's satisfactory? What is the main reason that people would move to Substack? And I would say the one main reason would be if they're doing something else on Substack like you are, they often just feel like, I want to bring everything under the same umbrella so that my audience base can just know that they have one destination to come see me, to comment on my stuff. They get an email every time I do something, et cetera. So it's to have one home. But probably really a big reason is in order to have something behind the paywall, because all of those other, most of the other hosting platforms are predicated on your content is all going to be free. Or if there's a way to paywall some, it's, on I think on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you can have some stuff paywalled, but it's kind of within their system, within their world. So as always with Substack, it's sort of agnostic. People can enjoy and appreciate your stuff anywhere. And for Substack podcasters who have some paywalled content, again, listen to Andrew Sullivan as a good example. He will say at the end of the free content that he puts out, it goes on Spotify, he will say, if you would like to hear more of this, and gives his Substack URL. And if you are a paying subscriber to his podcast, you can still listen to what you've paid for on the other platforms. You receive a custom RSS link, you put it into your podcast player and can listen to it. Yeah. So I think that the paid podcast, and there are other people trying to come at this problem, trying to solve this problem, but I would offer that Substack is the only solution where we have both the ability for you to really easily have paid video, audio, podcasting content, and we also have, you can do lots of types of content if you want to go beyond just audio. And a lot of podcasters do. They're like you. They want to both communicate some things with writing and communicate some things with video too. So I think I'll give one more example that people can kind of look at, who I think is a wonderful one, which is Mehdi Hassan, who used to be on MSNBC, and he left and he is now on Substack. He has a publication called Zeteo, and it has podcast content, it has video content, it has written content. It's just a good example of how you can have a media empire. And when you go to Zeteo, it's zeteo.com. You can, on Substack, have a custom domain rather than your brand.substack.com if you wish. So he has zeteo.com. If you went on it and you didn't know Substack, it doesn't say Substack anywhere. It's very much brand forward of his brand. And that's going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. That's another piece, because when I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Threads, I'm always very aware that I'm on those brands. They're very branded to those companies. But when I'm on a Substack, of course, if you or I or anybody else who's knowledgeable of Substack, we can kind of recognize the formats and we're like,
Sure.
What the sign up box, like we know it's a Substack,
Yep.
but Substack doesn't feel like, okay, here is our brand first, and then you are somewhere back there. It's much more what people want, which is that their brand comes first and they can customize and they can have it look and feel the way they want. So I've wandered from the original question, but I think that the thing that is really less well known is that Substack does have all these podcasting features that often work very well for people with niche podcasts where they have a dedicated audience. Doesn't have to be big. You don't have to be somebody who's big enough to have the Eat Sleep, Athletic Greens ads running. But maybe instead of the ads, have your audience support you directly and have some paywall content.
That's a really good point, actually, because what you mentioned there is there's different ways to brand it and make the look and feel and that sort of thing. Because one of my questions was, how do you avoid the Twitter problem? And when I say the Twitter problem, I could be talking about 27 different things, but specifically what I mean is there is only a certain percentage of people who are ever going to join Twitter. My wife is never, ever, ever going to get a Twitter account because it just doesn't make sense to her. So if I tell somebody, follow me on Substack or check me out on Substack, and they say, Substack, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? I'm confused. Where do I go? You know what I mean? The same sort of thing. So it sounds like there is a solution to that, which is to say, just like follow me, right? Like in my case, follow Micron, and that's it. And that's all they need to know. And they don't necessarily need to know or care about anything like, wait, what is a Substack? What does that mean? Where do I go? Right?
Right now, I would say I'm going to just make up some data based on nothing, but I don't think I'm too far off. 95% of people who come into the Substack ecosystem, the Substack platform, speaking grandly, are coming in because they have been brought in by the hand by a writer or podcaster. Because what happens is, I don't think people really hear about Substack and say, I've got to Google that, unless they're like you and me and are interested in new platforms and things like that.
Sure.
Or if they're sort of like coastal elite journalist and their friends are all talking about it and they Google it. What usually happens is they are watching CNN and they see somebody come on and it says this, the geopolitical analyst, and he has a Substack, and they Google that person's name, or they Google it, their name plus the word Substack. And hopefully the first Google result on the first page is that person's Substack. They don't know or care that it's Substack probably in this moment, but they click on it. And what do they see? They see the famous welcome page that all it has is the name and that box. And it's funny, just to give you some inside baseball, for some writers, that page is the bane of their existence. Oh, it looks too pushy. I don't want it to go there. Right? But I can tell you, after 7 years and every brainiac engineer optimizing it up, down, and sideways, that page, every pixel on that page is designed so that you can capture an email address without, you're not tricking anybody into it. If they put their email, they know they're going to get email from you. But so, okay, that is how people are coming into Substack, is because some specific person they care about is using Substack as a platform. Okay, now Substack has a problem, right? So Substack's problem is, okay, how do we invite people to participate more in our Substack network without, we can't do what Medium does and put a bunch of advertisements for other publications or advertisements for other stuff on your Substack publication page, because our promise to you is that you totally control that. So what we did was, one of the best features that we ever introduced was recommendations, which is if you are a Substack writer and you subscribe to other Substacks, you can recommend them, which simply means that when other people sign up for your Substack, after they're done signing up for yours, they will see a selection of the Substacks you've recommended, and it will say, Ron also recommends these Substacks. Would you like to check them out? That has been a really powerful tool, because let's go back to that geopolitics analyst. If somebody is interested in what he is doing, chances are the recommendations, which are made because he actually likes them, no money is changing hands, he authentically thinks that they are good things to read, they may like those other publishers too. And now they're coming deeper into Substack. Now, the other thing I'll mention, I said 95%. The other way that people are coming in now is the Substack app. So people are downloading the app. I think this is, if people hear about Substack and they don't come in because of wanting to follow a writer or podcaster, it is right now, they downloaded the app. A friend of theirs maybe told them about the app. They download it. And when you come into the app, it asks, of course, what topics are you interested in? And if
Sure.
somebody is interested in finance and they click finance, they're going to be shown, here are some things that you might want to get into and look at and follow. And they can choose to do that. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I think that every platform tries to do that. Twitter does try to do that. For anybody listening to this, try going into an incognito browser window and making a brand new Twitter account, and you'll see that the sign up flow is different than it used to be, but it's still sort of, I'm thinking of your wife not using Twitter. If she were just
Mhm.
going to use Twitter the first time, it sort of gives you this assortment of people to follow. Here's some celebrities. Here's some
Exactly.
people who they're not making their own tweets. Here's some funny brands, it's like
Right,
stuff
right,
that you would
right.
never care about. On Substack, what rises to top at Substack is only, if you look at the leaderboards on Substack. So anybody who's listening, if you go to substack.com on your browser and you click on the magnifying glass icon at left, and that'll take you to an area where it'll show some leaderboards of different topics.
Hmm.
The leaderboards are by revenue. So unless
Hmm.
somebody took out their credit card and actually paid, that is, if to become a top Substack, there's this, it can't really be gamed, because it has to be an authentic person who decides. It's not, Linda's at Substack and she's like, oh, I really like this one, let's make this be the top of the leaderboard. That's not a
Hmm.
thing.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, so
So
the
you're not
leader,
even curating that necessarily. You're not saying like we really want to push this author because we like what this author has to say.
we
It's
don't
it's
we don't do that
revenue.
with the we don't do that with the leaderboards. The leaderboards are very pure and by revenue. And I have had writers on Substack say, well, how do I get higher on the leaderboard? And it's
Mhm.
kind of, what a glib answer, make more money. But it really is like, as you are more successful, you make more. There are some surfaces that are curated by Substack. If people do what I just mentioned and go to explore with the magnifying glass, there's something called staff picks. And
Hmm.
so I have a colleague who's a marketing person, and she's putting what's there in staff picks. But I will tell you, what surfaces is far more what people are sharing with their friends, what writers are cross-pollinating. And every time you look at a Substack post, you'll see a share button. The number one way people are finding out about new Substacks and getting new Substack subscribers is somebody clicks that share button and shares it with their colleagues, shares it with their friends, and then those people come and they get
Hmm.
the welcome page and they put their email. So like Substack is not like YouTube, where YouTube perspective is, I'm just going to give you an endless algorithm of, here's a video, what do you
Yep.
think of this, what do you think of that, and it just wants you to be kind of borne along by a current. Substack is much, I'm not going to say Substack has no algorithms, because clearly when you go on the app, something is deciding what to show you. But
Mhm.
by and large, when you go on the Substack app, what you're going to mostly see is content from people you follow and from people they recommend. And it's sort of, one or two levels out, because that's a very good guide as to what people will like. And we'll go farther with this in the app, so that our desire is that, say, if I tell somebody about Substack, they come to the app, they're interested in finance, they should be seeing content about, oh, there was a Fed meeting today, or whatever is going to interest
Yeah.
them. They should not be, unlike Twitter, seeing, oh, here's a video of a fight beside a dumpster behind a Dairy Queen, because it's getting a lot of
Because it's getting
interaction
clicks
and
and views. Yeah,
engagement,
yeah, right.
and people are flipping out and reacting to it, and then there are ads in the replies to it, because if you're interested in fights, maybe there is some Substack about that. It would surprise me if not. Actually, it's like 100,000 Substacks, but by and large, we don't have an incentive to just show people things that are going to get them heated up. We want to show them
Hmm.
things that they're interested in enough to sign up and potentially pay someday.
Excellent. That kind of bleeds into my next question, which is I work in digital marketing, web development, search engine optimization. And SEO is one of the most obnoxious things on the planet. I do it, I make a lot of money with it, but I hate it because it's a very complicated whack-a-mole industry of like all these Byzantine algorithmic changes. And there are
Yeah.
people, SEO professionals who lie awake at night, sometimes literally at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, oh my goodness, I heard that Google's going to make another algorithm update and it's going to be called there's the Search Plus Your World update that happened many, many years ago. But then like there was the Pigeon update and then there's, local ranking updates and it's constantly changing. So
Mhm.
how do unlike on the internet and on Google, how can people who are especially creators in particular, and especially not non-technical creators, who don't even understand SEO or how algorithms work, how can they avoid becoming slaves to the algorithm? How can Substack
Yeah.
users not say like, oh, well, people told me that it's best to post on Tuesdays now, so I'm going to post on
Yeah.
Tuesdays, or the top 5 list. Those are doing really well right now. So everything I'm going to do for the next 6 months is the top 5 this and that. How would you recommend people avoid chasing the algorithm?
Yeah. Honestly, this is going to sound like the most capitalistic answer, but what really tells whether people value what you are doing is whether they will pay. Okay. Even as I say that, I know a couple of people listening are feeling hostile to it. The discussion of money, discussion of asking for money, it always is delicate and sensitive, particularly when you're talking to journalists and creatives who may cope with unpredictability around this. But here's what I mean. If you are on Medium, you have every incentive because people are just looking for attention and you are in this frantic tournament for it and everybody is all lumped together and they're dangling the carrot of maybe your work will get spread. I know a tiny bit about this because I have talked to people who've moved over from Medium to Substack, and they get very incented and they have said to me, if you make a Medium post about Medium, they completely algorithmically suppress it. So nobody talks about Medium. And I was like, wow, this sounds very kind of fascistic. Like if you make a Substack post about Substack, it actually travels a lot. And we are not encouraging that necessarily. It's just that people are trying to learn. So I think that with the chasing of the algorithm, people are asking a lot. Should I post on Tuesday? If you guys are trying to encourage video, maybe I should post video. Ultimately, just like getting views and getting interaction is not the currency of making a real business out of your writing, podcasting, or video. The real currency is money. And if somebody somewhere is willing to pay. So I think the way that you get out of that is, what is the reward system? The reward system on Twitter is you're going to get more followers and more likes, and you're going to get hypnotized. You're going to get hypnotized that is what you should actually care about. And I have for sure have people I've reached out to and they say, well, I have, 100,000 Twitter followers. How many of them are going to come over? And I really don't know, because it depends on how compelling is what you're doing. What is again, like MBA words, but like, what's your value proposition to the reader? How much are those real, or are they bots, or did they all log off in 2016? So I think that the best way to think about what I should create is not, people have been trained that they should want to serve an algorithm. And regarding the SEO thing, I would like to talk to you about this offline, because I want to pick your brain about the SEO stuff. I know you know a lot about it. It's very mysterious and it changes all the time. We have all, as people who make any kind of writing, content, video on the internet, we have been trained that we have to be sitting there reading the tea leaves all the time of how we're going to get our stuff to be looked at and surfaced. And that belief does still, it's sort of, I'm not going to say PTSD, but people have this sort of deep set thing of like, okay, that's what I have to do on Substack as well. But what really you should be thinking about, I think I would offer, is value and human nature. Like, what do people really want to read, and what will people pay for? I am never going to make it so that, or anybody at Substack or any algorithm is never going to make it that people will have the same propensity to pay for poetry as they do for stock picks, right? So that no matter what we would do. Now, am I saying that everybody listening to this who writes poetry should like get into stock picks? No, not at all. But people should pursue their personal bliss and what they think that they have to offer. Again, might sound corny, but whatever they think they personally have to offer that might be different and special, and that they can keep doing it and do it sustainably, that's what they should do. So the whole algorithmic thing, like on Substack, you are not going to, or really nor on any other place, are you going to have more success by sending something out on Tuesday rather than Wednesday. Those are just kind of tweaks around the margin. And I would say the kind of thing where it's sort of a lowest common denominator content, like my example of a video of fights, or like the proverbial Medium 6 things successful people do before breakfast. I think if you just think in your head, like, would anybody pay for this, or is it just sort of a dopamine hit in the moment? Often that is the answer. Now, even as I say all that, there is lots of stuff on Substack that people are paying a lot for that is not stock picks and is personal essays and is, reflective, in-depth research, all different kinds of things. But I think, if there's any message for people, the SEO era. Let me ask you this. What do you think about the meme of SEO is dead?
That's an SEO's favorite thing to say. They love to say that because
They themselves, right? Love saying
yeah,
that.
because it's such a joke. It's like picture a headstone, that says like SEO for, from 1994 to 2000 or 2002 or 2003, 2004, 2005. Every year, everybody says that.
Mm-hmm.
So the point there being, no, SEO is not dead. It never has been dead. Everybody wants it to die
Mm.
a slow death. But ultimately, I think the trick with SEO is to figure out what users want. And Google is actually, when people say SEO, they almost always mean Google.
Yes.
But the optimization of content across platforms is actually something that's good to do and important to do. And the thing that Google is pretty good at, even though everybody hates hearing this answer, is they say just create good content. Like for
Yeah.
years,
So
there was a
annoying.
Webmaster Central or Webmaster Tools YouTube channel, and for years they would just crank out all these videos, and people would send in questions, and I used to send in questions, and a lot of times the answer was, "Yeah, that's not such a big deal. I wouldn't worry about that so much. Just create good content. Just create
Mm-hmm.
good content." I think that is true, actually, to a certain extent. It really is just create good content. So I don't think SEO is dead. But the trick is figuring out what works on every single platform, right? Because kind of going back to what I said before,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you can do a really good job optimizing your Twitter profile and getting a lot of Twitter followers, but there is a percentage of people on the internet who have not and never will come into contact with Twitter content ever, because the only way they'll ever see it is if there's a screenshot of a tweet, let's say, in a news
Right.
story, but they're only reading that news story because they're on Yahoo News or
Right.
MSNBC or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
They're not on Twitter, right? They're just seeing, hey, did you see the president tweeted this thing? Here's a screenshot of it. So it's all about optimizing for each individual platform. So, in the case of video is a great example. And I don't know, it's interesting because I don't know that people are doing this on Substack yet, to the point where when people go on YouTube, usually they're asking questions. Yes, the algorithm feeds them a lot of stuff that they didn't ask for. Here's here's this YouTuber giving away 50 Teslas, watch their reactions. But a lot of times that search box is prime real estate, right? So Google
Mm-hmm.
is the number one search engine in the world, but
Mm-hmm.
YouTube is number two, and it is
Mm.
owned by Google. So for the most part, people go to YouTube to get answers to things. Either they want to watch a video or, like a video, like a movie, or they want to find a trailer for an upcoming film, or they're doing DIY things like how do I, replace the oil filter on my 2008 Volvo S80, or
Oh,
where is the
yes.
battery? My daughter
Yes.
drives a 24-year-old. It's 2000 Volvo S80. Where's the battery? It's in the
Right.
trunk, right? Like you wouldn't know that. You pop the hood
Wow.
and you're looking for it, thinking like, where is it? It's not here. It doesn't have a battery. Yeah, it does. It's in the trunk. Who would know that? So you're on YouTube and you're searching for, where to find the battery in Volvo S80, and then here's a video, and then it shows you
Yeah.
with a
And shows you.
thumbnail and arrows and stuff like a shocking surprise. Here's where your Volvo battery is. Watch this video. So but YouTube's one of the most crass examples of optimization because the YouTube creators are constantly saying like, okay, well, I'm going to change out this thumbnail. Oh, the thumbnail is not working. I'm going to change out. They'll do testing with thumbnails on videos and say like, well, I launched it and then a week later I changed it to this thumbnail and then I changed it to this thumbnail and this
Yeah.
thumbnail worked the best. And to me, that's the most obnoxious excess of like, you're looking at all your video content and saying, okay, well, if I tweak this 1% and I tweak this
Yes.
3%, and I tweak this 2%, but for the most part, those are the people who are like trying to make a living off of doing that.
That's right.
So maybe to kind of answer that question, SEO is important for the people who are obsessed with it and have the time and make lots
Mm-hmm.
of content. Yes, you can definitely make small changes here and you're add an H1 here and make sure there's alt text on this image and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
for the most part, most small businesses, they don't really need to worry about that so much, but they do need to worry about creating good content. And that's
Yeah.
always been the case. On that note, there's some strange content creators out there, and I wonder your perspective on that. So stock picks, great example. A lot of people follow that. A lot of people care about that. It's very obvious what it is. It's very clear. But then I saw there's this guy subscribed to on YouTube recently, Dry Creek Wrangler School. And he's just a guy wearing a cowboy hat who lives out in the Midwest. I don't even remember what state. I don't think he even tells people what state. And he just sits in a camp chair and he smokes a cigar and he gives life advice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Long form content, 20 minutes, 30
Mm-hmm.
minutes. He's just talking about, hey, if you want to be a good husband and father, men, here's what you ought to do. And there cattle were giving birth to a calf the other day, and it made me think about that's kind of like life. I never thought I would subscribe to, a cowboy smoking a cigar, but it works. And a lot of people like that.
Yes.
What kind of things do you see on Substack there where in his case, I think his success is due to the fact that he is just himself. He's not trying to be, he's not, I don't think he's asking other people like, well, what should I talk about? Or what should I say?
Right.
Or how should I do it? I mean, this guy is uniquely himself. He's doing his thing. It's like you happen to stumble on his farm out in the middle of nowhere and
Mhm.
you're like seated at the table with him. Do you see that on Substack? Do you
Yeah.
recommend that? How can people really embrace that?
I think the kind of a writer or creator you're talking about, it's the person who is deeply authentically themselves, and then people feel very attracted to it. There may also be a fantasy aspect where it's like, I am dreaming of having a life as simple as this man's life. Of course, in my citified head, it's way simpler than it is in reality, right? So there's an element of fantasy. I also think people make it look easier than it is. Like they come and they do this thing that looks like they're just inhabiting the role, but it may be very intuitive to them, but it also is like they are really special. And for sure, there are people like that on Substack where they are, you know, a lot of the time it will be somebody who is just in a deep niche. Like there are a couple of, I'm going back to the stock picks thing, but there are some stock market writers and financial writers where they will just talk. Here's a good example, I think. So if you work at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all these places, the number of stocks that you can talk about, you're always talking about the biggest ones. You're always talking about the most liquid ones because you're talking to institutional investors who need to move billions of dollars around, billions. So they cannot invest in little quirky small situations. They're on weird secondary markets where you can only buy $20,000 worth at a time. Well, guess what? There are a lot of retail investors that like those kind of situations, which are less efficient, and they do deep work on them. And then it's not new to Substack. They've been blogging about them for years. And what I think Substack helped that group of people with is they can now easily put what they're doing behind a paywall if they wish. And it's not just, their work is not just available for free to everybody, but there
Right.
are lots of investors who love having a community of people to chew the fat with and bounce their ideas off of. I was talking to somebody who he has a modest following for his stock ideas and does make money talking about capital markets on Substack. And he posted about an idea, and he has had somebody reach out to him and say, I've been doing work on this company for like 10 years, and I'd love to share everything I've done with you. That is something that does not show up in Substack's statistics, right? That doesn't, well, we're not getting any 10% of that, but that's tremendous value. So I think that if you look at what kind of quirky, different things people are doing on Substack, it is being an obsessive. And I wanted to touch on something you talked about before about the optimization and having a different thumbnail. So I think that it relates to what we're saying about, should I post on Tuesday? How do I feed the algo? I think this is saying as an observer, right? So I say this with humbleness because always when somebody at Substack is giving advice to writers and creators, we
Sure.
always have to say, you guys know more than us. But based on my observations, often people might trip themselves up or become frustrated when they focus on the optimization around the edges versus the basics. What are the basics? It's so tedious to talk about being consistent. Oh my God, Gary Vaynerchuk in 2016, be consistent. Just keep doing the same thing. Do the same thing 100 times and then say what's next. I will tell you I have a colleague, Farah Store, and if people want to look at her Substack, it's farah.substack.com. And when she started working at Substack, about the same time as me, about 3 years ago, in addition to starting her job at Substack, she had a background in journalism. She was the editor of Elle UK and other publications, and she started a Substack. And I'm mentioning her as an example because she was consistent above all. I don't know that a week has gone by where she hasn't, and she posts every Sunday. If you go to her Substack, she has some content free and some paid content. And she's done remarkably well. She has, publicly shared she is making six figures off her Substack. Evenings and weekends thing, okay? And like I said, there's no, there's nobody pulling strings, and we can't magically reach into people's pockets and take out their money and have them pay her. They pay her if they want to. This is,
Mhm.
she, I think, is also a great example of people are thinking like, well, I like writing about lifestyle or fashion or relationships. And Linda is saying that you only make money writing about stocks. Go and look at FARS and go and look at other fashion and lifestyle publications. And you will be able to see from, the fact that some have the bestseller check mark, some are doing very, very well. But the true commonality is consistency, which, going back to optimization versus the basics, if somebody says to me, should I post at 7 a.m. or 10 a.m.? And I say to them, going back to the Google advice, just post good content and just be consistent, they're going to be like, wow, that was a waste of time asking you for advice. You told me the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
What works in life is the most obvious thing, and then a certain ineffable magic that comes usually after experimentation, trying different things, banging your head against a wall a lot, some luck, and figuring out what is the essential genius deep inside you that you can bring the world. Okay. And I don't blame people if they roll their eyes at all that, but there's no secret sauce to making money from content on the internet other than that. I don't think. If I ever do find it, I will disclose it
You'll tell us.
exclusively on this podcast. So stay tuned.
Okay.
But I don't think that there is.
I've noticed there are two very different kinds of people who are now joining Substack. And I watch the announcements that you make, and I believe Chris also makes, Chris Best. And he, I'd like to welcome so-and-so to Substack. And the craziest thing is I look at that and then, I will click on that link. Okay, John Smith has just joined Substack. And there's 78,000 subscribers or something insane like that. I still can't quite figure that out. But clearly that's an example of what we were talking about earlier. You're people who, I'm going to guess, have taken their audience with them.
That's what it is.
But then there's also people like me who start at zero, right? I found out about Substack in January of this year, and I started with 0 followers, 0 connections, 0 subscribers. I didn't know anyone on the platform. I just created an account because the people in my writing group said, you should probably, and they weren't even adamant about it. They were like, as long as you're writing, you should probably create a Substack account also if you have time. And I thought, okay, well, I'll try that. Those are two very different kinds of people creating accounts on Substack, and there's two very different approaches, right? So, because if I come to you with 100,000 followers already, and let's say 78,000 of them become subscribers, versus I'm a brand new person who's talking, I'm smoking a cigar and I'm sitting out in the Midwest and I'm talking about life lessons on a farm. Is there a different approach? Is it the same approach?
It's a different approach. I will say, if somebody just starts a Substack and you click and they have 78,000 subscribers, half of all people who start Substacks import some kind of existing mailing list. So this could be somebody who they were on MailChimp for 15 years for all we know, accumulating email signups via their website. And then they decide to come to Substack. Often the inception of that is, I have this email list. I've been emailing them every week or every month. They are engaged with what I'm doing. I want to offer more, or I want to paywall something. I want to, instead of paying MailChimp thousands of dollars, I want to, and again, I shouldn't say anything negative about what we could consider a competitor. MailChimp is incredible for what they do. If Banana Republic contacted me and said, we want to come on Substack and sell sweaters using Substack, I would say, for the love of all that's good and holy, call MailChimp. They are amazing for you. They want to serve the enterprise. But if you are a writer or creator and you're using MailChimp, you are probably like, oh my gosh, I'm paying all this money. Instead, you can come over to Substack, and if we are fully featured for what you need. We're not fully featured to sell the sweaters. We're fully featured for what you need, and you can turn on paid and paywall some of your content, and it works absolutely beautifully. So often, if for people who are using Substack and they see somebody come and it seems like they got all these people overnight, it's the proverbial overnight success that took 5 or 10 or 15 years. Because they did not, Substack isn't like, here you go, huge success. They were grinding. And the same thing where very often they don't have an email list to import, but it's one of these platforms we've been talking about that doesn't let you export what you're doing, but they tell their Instagram subscribe. People want a cool example of this would be Sam Harris, the writer, just started a Substack. And if you go and look at his Instagram, when he started his Substack, he made an Instagram post about it. And he said, I'm still going to have my podcast. I'm still going to, he has a meditation app, but he said, I'm going to be working more on writing. I'd like to lean back into writing, because he is a writer, and you can come over to Substack. Now, you asked about what might be different with the strategy. When Sam Harris started his Substack, he turned on paid from the very first day. And he, right from the get-go, was inviting people who want to engage with what he is doing and support him as a creative and as a thinker to pay for him. And if somebody is, I would say, by and large, it is always good for people if they have any kind of importing list, any kind of following that they're porting over, turn on paid subscriptions from the first day. Even if you don't have a fully sketched out plan of what you want to offer behind a paywall, because your super fans will rush to pay you from the very first day. Now, let's take the other situation of where somebody is starting, somebody from like your writing group where they have been a writer, but they just have, their friends and family Facebook page or Twitter. They haven't decided to do I'm going to build an online following thing. So they don't have, most journalists don't have an email list. I remember one time a journalist, quite famous journalist in Canada, in my country, was coming to Substack after a 30-year career. And I said to him, well, do you have any email list to import? And he looks at me like I have two heads. Like, why? If I worked for, newspapers and magazines, they don't give you the emails of people who are
their list.
That's their list, obvious. But in his case, he had some following. So word of mouth was very useful. So our general advice is to, if you have some following, to turn on paid from day one. But if somebody is listening to this and they do not have any kind of following whatsoever, I might do them a disservice by telling them at the very beginning of their journey, when they only have 5 people signed up to their list, 5, 6, 7 people, when they're doing that really tough cliff face to climb, which is your first 100. And if I say, oh, I turn on paid and, paywall half your stuff, they might feel, okay, I'm paywalling and why am I reducing my reach so much? Or why even turn on paid at the beginning? For that person, maybe the thing to do would be to get some momentum. And I'm not going to say an exact number of people, because I have seen people with, they get to a couple hundred and then they turn on paid and good things happen. Here's a trick. When you set up a Substack, by default, pledges are turned on. Pledges, and you will know this, Ron, pledges allow people to say, if this person ever turns on paid, I will pay. So, and I think, I remember when Substack introduced pledges as a feature, and I was sort of skeptical. I was like, are people going to understand this? I was thinking, oh, is this too pushy? Which writers worry about a lot.
Yes. Right.
Well, again, it ended up being, if recommendations is the best feature we ever shipped, pledges is the second best feature, because what it did was show a lot of writers who might not have as many followers as the Sam Harris and Pamela Andersons of the world, but showed them, hey, if I have a couple of people, a handful of people who express willingness to pay for me, maybe I should turn on paid and collect that money. And then sure enough, when they do, there are more people who want to. So yeah, if we were going to kind of boil out one strategic thing from this, it would be, if you are starting out and you feel you have any kind of traction, or if you have a list to import, or you have a group of people that you're moving, strongly encourage you to turn on paid right from day one, because it doesn't hurt you at all. You don't need to paywall anything. And okay, I'm biased because Substack doesn't make any money unless the writers make some money. But really, what we have seen from people is the minute they have their first paying subscriber on the internet, that is someone they don't know. It's somewhat of a magic moment. It's very inspiring and motivating for them. And it's hard to keep going. It is a grind to make content all the time, right? So so that's why I'm always promoting with prospective Substack creators I'm talking to, try to turn on paid. But if you are really starting from scratch and you don't want to muck around with that, you just want to put your toe in and start seeing if you can have a consistent writing practice. If you're just, let's say you're part of a writing group and they say, try to write something once a week, it's totally fine to just start your Substack and just go. For people in that situation, my strong recommendation would be to download the app and start interacting with people on Substack Notes, because that's a group of people who are already bought into the ecosystem. They already have signed up for Substacks. They have a very open mind to checking new stuff out. You can network with other writers. So if anybody is listening to this, download the app and start a Substack and start to get into this system a little bit more. And they're going to learn way more from other Substack writers than they ever could from anything, I would say.
Well, that's great. Which reminds me of another thing, which is like the fact that you and I are talking is kind of shocking to me, because I have one of the smallest, followings of anybody on the entire platform. I'm just starting out, right? Like I said, I just found out about Substack in January. I didn't have a list. So it's not like I said, okay, I'm going to import my 1,000 raving fans from years in the past. But it's very unusual to see a platform take small creators seriously And as a great example, I'll keep picking on Twitter. I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, just like everybody does, right? And you can get monetized now on Twitter, sort of, right? You have to reach a threshold. Like there's very specific thresholds of your content has to have. Well, first of all, you have to be a paid subscribers. You have to do that first, and then you have to turn on, the ability to monetize. But you only are offered that if you're a verified user and a paid user, and you have X number of followers, and then you can offer paid subscriptions at a certain level. And then if you actually want to monetize it to get ad revenue, your content has to reach a certain number of views. You're probably familiar with that, but it's like 5 million views in 90 days or something like that. And you don't even get the option. The button is grayed out. You can't monetize till you reach a certain threshold of like, hey, people notice me. I have a following. I'm famous. Substack has, to a certain extent, it seems almost the opposite, where it's like this as a platform and as a company, Substack is saying, hey, small creators, people with small followings, people starting out, people with no list, whatever, come one, come all. That seems very different. You talk to that for a second? Like, I mean, again, the fact that you and I are talking here it's shocking. Like, I'm talking to a person who is employed at the platform that I'm trying to build my audience at. If I called someone at Twitter or, sent them a message and said, hey, can I interview you for my podcast, which has almost no listeners whatsoever? Probably they'd say, yeah, I get those requests all the time. I don't really have time.
Yeah. Yeah. Substack, I think sometimes people think that it is thousands of employees making billions of dollars, and we look bigger than we are. We are three kids in a trench coat. And the reason for that is because we serve and compete with the traditional mainstream media, which went through a phase of paying a lot of attention to us because some names that they knew came to Substack and did very well on Substack and continue to do well on Substack. So we got all this coverage. It's kind of funny because you have probably Silicon Valley venture-backed companies who are thousands of people and are making billions of dollars, and they work in payments or cybersecurity, and the New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal never pay attention to them. But meanwhile, here you have Substack, which I can tell you is fewer than 100 people doing all this. And that really is part of why we do things like me being on this podcast with you and wanting small creators like, look, we are the underdog in all this. There have been numerous times, again, like I said, I came to Substack about 3 years ago. I can remember when I came, a friend saying, well, aren't you worried about Twitter has Review, which is a newsletter product, and don't you think that they'll kind of kill Substack, which it didn't. And then I remember like a year later, Facebook came out with Bulletin, and it was, aren't you kind of, Facebook is going to steamroll you guys now, and that didn't happen. So, but we're still small. We're still at the beginning of and so what we're going back to what you said at the very beginning of the conversation of things on the platform tend to work. I think it's how we set up the incentives, how the founders and the engineering team built it in the first place. It seems to be working. But if this is going to be way bigger, then we just are very oriented to, we need lots more new people coming in and taking advantage of the tool and the platform and the network and everything we're trying to be. When people are coming on Substack, if they are going to be writing finance content, especially younger people who are kind of newer to, well, how do I position this and should my strategy be? Sometimes they think they should have a very formal sounding name and very corporate sounding, and they should get somebody to make a logo for them. And I always sort of say, you're not going to out JP Morgan. People really like it. And I tell them to go as an example and look at what Noah Smith, who writes a Substack, No Opinion, is doing. His name is Noah, and his Substack is called No Opinion. And when you go on the About page, he has a picture of himself. And when you look at his welcome page, he has a picture of his rabbit. That's his pet. It's very personal. Wow. It's very clear. It's this individual, his thoughts, his ideas, his opinions. Nobody is paying him a salary. There's no advertiser governing what he can and can't say. It's very one-to-one. And so I think Substack, for where we are right now, that's why you see Chris Best on Substack notes and he's posting away and people can reply to him and stuff like that. That's why you would see me saying something like, if people are coming, I can go on a podcast. We can't do everything. Sometimes I do have people reach out to me and they're like, Linda, can we, do a call? I want you to show me how to use the platform. I cannot do that because for myself and other people on my team, we have to really be very, very sort of mercenary with our time and really focus on, you will get this, like people who are going to come to Substack and bring a lot of attention, bring a lot of money. And that's a shame. I wish there were 100 of us just on my team rather than half a dozen of us. And then we could talk to everybody. But things like podcasts, it's at scale because you know what writers and content creators and video makers are really good at doing? Googling. They will Google. And when they're doing research, it's so funny because sometimes if I am talking to somebody who has a big audience somewhere or a long career writing or whatever, and I'll get on a call with them and they'll say, oh, I listened to your podcast with so-and-so and that answered some of my questions, but here's what I have. People, educate themselves. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why it's worthwhile and worth us doing. But I think we just have underdog mentality, maybe still, and startup mentality, and we should. And people should not think that we sort of see ourselves as this, big incumbent where, oh, it's so obvious we're winning. Like we still, I think, we're trying to have that kind of scrappy mentality of still wanting to talk to people about how we're doing. Like, I think if you are stuck in an elevator with a Substack employee, you're probably going to get an earful about how great Substack is. And even if they're an engineer, they're going to try to recruit you.
Well, it reminds me of Gary Vee, who we mentioned before.
Yeah.
I found Gary Vee many, many years ago, right when he first started Wine Library TV. And that was back when he went by Gary Vaynerchuk, but he would always say, this is Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yes.
I always said it
So you could Google him.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess now he goes by Gary Vee. But the point being, so he started this website that had embedded videos, and it was called Wine Library TV. And he would do these reviews of sometimes very silly, sometimes he'd say things like, what wine goes the best with Captain Crunch. He'd have like silly cereal and wine pairings and ridiculous stuff like that. But the platform he chose was Vidler. And I don't know if you even remember that. But that was before YouTube. YouTube was around, but he looked at his options and he chose a platform called Vidler, which may not even be around anymore. And it had these little highlights with little screenshots. And you could kind of say like, okay, I want to skip ahead to this part. And I see on the thumbnail that he's holding a box of Captain Crunch. I want to scrub all the way to that. So it had some neat kind of esoteric features that YouTube didn't have. And somebody asked him, why did you pick Vidler instead of YouTube? And he said, because first of all, they welcomed me. And second of all, I could be a big fish in a small pond. I just thought that was fascinating. So he built up his kind of empire now, I guess, with a very, very tiny platform that no one had ever heard of and might not even still be in business now. So, who knows? Maybe someday you already have some Gary V's who started on Substack. You may have multiple. Or maybe there's a Gary Vee out there that, listens to something like this, a very, very small one-person show, and then says, I think I'll give that a try, and then turns it into, VaynerMedia. And then eventually someday he's going to buy the New York Jets.
Yes. And it's such a great story of him making that choice, even if the platform didn't persist and survive. I think it's also a story of why do people become skeptical about all these platforms and feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to make yet another new account on another new platform. It's because I mentioned earlier about Review, all of the people who set up on Review and did all that work to learn how it used, and then Twitter just deprecated it. And the people who created and founded Review, and they had an exit, but do you think that they felt fantastic? I don't know them, but they probably didn't feel fantastic about that simply being sunset. Or Vine is another example. I'm thinking of a comedian who I know, Canadian comedian, and he had built quite a following on Vine, invested a lot of time learning how the algorithms of that worked. And then they just shut it down one day. And so when I talk to him about Substack, he's not inclined necessarily to be trusting, oh, here's another platform that's going to make me rich. No, he's going to be skeptical. He's going to say, well, how do I know these guys aren't going to sell out to LinkedIn or something? Because of the way Substack is set up, he has the assurance that he owns his email list and he owns his payments and he owns everything, so he can clearly still it would be rather discombobulating if anything happened to Substack, but people have the choice. They have the option of their own. So yeah, it's funny. I have emailed Gary Vaynerchuk and asked him, like, would you like to come on Substack? I'll give you the full walkthrough. I'll talk to you about it. He didn't reply to me. So if anybody's listening to this who knows Gary, or if Gary is listening to this, stranger things have happened, go on Notes and tag me in a note, and we would love to talk to you. One thing is, often we are talking to people and they may be known for one thing, but they come to Substack because they want to do something different. Like they've been talking about one thing for 10 years and they want to talk about something different. Pamela Anderson is a good example, right? She's very much known for being on Baywatch and being this glamorous celebrity. She just started a Substack. Her Substack is not pictures of herself. It's writing. Right. She's in a different phase of her life and she has this tremendous fan base and they want to be engaged with her in a different way. So sometimes people come and they want to start something different and new, and we're delighted when they do that.
That's a really good point. So maybe a person who would be an ideal fit for Substack would be like a retired police officer who is like done with the 40-year career and is on to the next thing and thinks, I'd just like to share some stories about what it was like, maybe for the first time ever, right?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, who I find very often perspective to talk to will be people who are quite young, like they're 25, 26, 27, 28, because they might be before they get into their journey of starting a family. It's not that they have a ton of time on their hands, but they have a lot of drive and passion to build something. And then who I also often find is very perspective to talk to is people who are 65 and up, because they're a journey with the very complicated part of, their highest earning years or their really intensive taking care of kids is ending, but they have a huge amount of stories and, their kids might be tired of hearing it, but they can come on Substack and share about that. And many of the people I have reached out to, with the power of compounding and creating an audience, sometimes if you are older, you have created some kind of audience, some kind of reputation. So often I find myself, I'm reached out to older people. All that said, still there's a lot of people in their 30s, in their 40s, who it just depends on what their path is. The example I gave of my colleague, Farah, like she is a person who is kind of in that very busy part of her life. She's has this very demanding job, but she still was able to make it on Substack through that consistency. So let me ask you something though. How old are your children? Because you mentioned your daughter. I know you have 5 kids, but you mentioned your daughter driving.
Yes. That's why we bought a Volvo. I bought the safest car I could possibly find. Let's see, 18 to 12. We had 5 kids in 6 years.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So, you are the cohort of people that I would stereotypically think is way too busy to be doing too much content. And here you are. He's got a podcast. He's got his Substack. So how do you, that totally sounds like the sexist question people ask women of how do you balance it all? But how do you determine or how do you carve out, maybe is the better way of asking, how do you carve out time to do the kind of work that you want to do with what I'm sure must be a lot of other responsibilities?
You just make it a priority, right? So I don't know if anybody listening to this has listened to any of my previous podcast episodes or maybe will in the future. My podcast episodes are about crazy things, right? Like being an opera singer and
becoming an EMT, just your life. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so you've looked at some of that. Yeah, so I went to EMT school and then ended up not working as an EMT. I was a professional opera chorister for a couple of years. That was ridiculous. I had no business doing that. I was so busy. I was literally going to college and raising 5 kids and running my business and singing opera all at the same time. It was insanity. I don't know how. So to answer the question, I don't know how other than just saying, I see an opportunity. I want to do this. I'm going to put in the time. I'm going to do it. And then, I got a degree in storytelling, right? I made my own custom college degree where I learned about journalism and digital photography and video editing and script writing and public speaking and broadcasting and photojournalism and all these things. And I just thought, let's find a way to, if I'm going to go back to school, I'm going to do it in a way that is interesting, right? So I'm only going to take the classes that, aside from the ones that are required, I'm only going to take the classes that I find worth my time. So learning German, oh, my goodness, that was difficult.
Wow.
I'd learned German growing up. My family's of German origin. So my dad taught us German when we were growing up, but taking it seriously as an adult. Okay, I'm going to go take German classes. I'm going to learn. I'm going to study. I'm going to read. I'm going to do it the right way academically. I'm going to get quizzed and tested and graded and stuff like that. That was really hard, but it was definitely worth doing. So for this stage that I'm in right now is actually, I'm kind of chilled out. Like I had this insane life for all these years doing all this crazy stuff. And now we moved to Arizona.
Oh,
My wife and I, our school is done. We're just chilling out and just trying to get through the teenage years right now. But I have a lot of stories from, the time I met a four-star general and the time I met an astronaut who drove a lunar rover on the moon, right? Like
wow,
I've met
neat.
some fascinating people. Brian Dennehy, the actor,
Mm,
right? Like Weird Al Yankovic. Like it's
so cool.
a lot of these little tiny stories about little tiny things that happen in life. And now I don't necessarily have the time, but I'm making the time and saying, okay, I can sit down for an hour and I can talk about, the time that I applied to become a foreign service officer. And I got a couple of steps into the interview process, and then they pulled the rug out from under me. Okay, well, what was that like? Well, it was confusing and it was frustrating and it was depressing
Hmm.
and it was
Hmm.
exciting, right? Like taking the FSOT, the FSOT, taking the test and then passing it and thinking like, oh my goodness, I might actually have a shot at working for the Department of State. It was almost on a lark that I took the test in the first place, but then I
Mm,
passed it and I thought, oh, okay, well, gee, now let's see where this goes, right? So anyway, just stories about, what has happened in the past. And if people find that interesting, great. If they don't, that's okay too. But
hmm.
Substack for me has been a really great platform for that because not only can I import my podcast like we've talked about, but I'm also creating new stories. And so
Hmm.
adding the new and the old. And I'm still not sure about, that question that someone asked me a while ago, which is when are you going to decide or how do you decide this is worthy of an episode, a podcast
Hmm.
episode?
Yeah.
This is
Hmm.
worthy of an article. I'm still
Hmm.
not sure how to do that. And one thing that I've struggled with is recording and doing the voiceover afterward. It's time consuming enough to write an article, right? Like
Hmm.
anywhere between 30 minutes and 5 hours, let's say, generally speaking. And then saying, okay, all right, that's done. It's spell checked. I hit publish. Good. Okay, now I'm going to sit down and record myself reading it out loud. I have done that, but I don't always do that. So I'm very inconsistent about that. So I
Hmm.
think there's
Hmm.
just going to be a trick where it's like I got to get in this cadence of, every day that I'm going to write, I'm going to sit down for an hour and then write and either publish it at the end of an hour or, do an hour today and then an hour tomorrow and then an hour on Wednesday or, whatever. And then say, okay, now it's good enough. I'm going to publish that. And as part of my process, I'm going to record the voiceover. But Substack has been a really great platform for me in that regard because, like I said, it has everything I've thought of. Like, there's not a single
Hmm.
thing yet that I've found where I've thought, I really wish they had this feature, but
Hmm.
they don't. I can't think of one. Usually it's the
That's
opposite.
good.
It's like, okay, well, someday I'll get around to that because that's a nice benefit, but I don't have time for that right now. Things like that. So, yeah, anyway, where does the time come from? It's just a matter of saying, I'm going to do this. And I'm doing it in faith that 10 years from now, I'll look back and say, boy, was I glad that 10 years ago, I
Hmm.
made an account on Substack and I turned on monetization and I started writing, even though nobody was listening. Because there are lots of things in my life where I've done that. I started blogging years ago,
Hmm.
2008, I think
Hmm.
I started. And I never made a lot of money from blogging, but what I did was I learned an unbelievable amount of internet marketing, how people search for things, what people click on, how to write calls to action, what things rank well in Google, what doesn't, getting your images indexed, getting videos indexed, all those things, what broken, how to check for broken links, all those things that naturally very well fit into becoming a web developer.
Hmm.
And those go hand in hand. And one of the biggest problems that I see a lot of people making in SEO or web development is they understand this knowledge about their business or the company they work for, but they never do anything on the side. So one thing I've
Hmm.
always told people, I was a marketing director at a digital agency in 2010. So however many years ago that was, 14 years ago. Um, and we hired a marketing manager, and she said, what can I do to learn? Because I just got out of college and I've never really done this before. I have a degree, but I don't have almost any experience to speak of. I said, create your own blog. Now, this was before Substack, right? Create your own blog and just write. And she said, about what? I said, anything. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter. So she
Hmm.
started writing about being a teacher of gymnastics at a place for kids. It was a kids gymnastics. It's not even like a really athletic gymnastics thing. It's more like a daycare. But she was the gymnastics teacher. I said, great, write about that. Share pictures about that. Talk about that. Express your feelings. Um, you know, get people to click on things. Get people to not even subscribe, but just like see what happens when you put content out there, and it will make you a better writer. It will make you a better internet marketer, and it will also give you a habit, a good habit of, I'm going to sit down and write something now. And here's my process for doing that. And once you do it once, then it's easier to do it the second time. And then by the time you hit, blog post number 88, you're a champ, you're a whiz. You've been there, you've done that, you know exactly what to do and how to do it. So
Well,
I'm excited about Substack.
This is why I think everybody who works at Substack should have a Substack. And it's a completely different level of empathy when you actually are making posts or you are on notes and posting. And it's not everybody's personality to write or to share, but I think it just lets you, just like what you're saying about just do it and try it and go through it and develop a process and feel the feelings. And you just learn so much from walking the path, and it doesn't have to be instant greatness. I think one of the best sort of frameworks that I have heard when it comes to writing for the public, using the internet to share what you're doing and what you're thinking, and actually just getting started writing. There are these two entrepreneurs slash writing content creation teachers, Dickie Bush and Nicholas Cole. You probably know those names. And they have been doing, for years, they have done books and courses and guidance about this sort of thing. And they like have a number of good quotes that goes in mind. One is not clickbait if you keep your promise. I love that one, which is if you have a title and it's a title that is designed for somebody to click on it and people say, oh, it's clickbait because you're trying to make them click. It's not clickbait if you keep your promise. But another one was you don't have to be a world-class expert on the thing that you are writing about. You just have to be a few steps ahead of the person doing the reading, right? So I might say, okay, what do I know something about? How about how to get a job at a tech company? Well, I've got one job at one tech company. That's kind of like if somebody's been married once and they're going to write a book about how to get married or have good relationships. It's like, okay, you did it once in a row. It's mostly luck. But what could I say that would be interesting? Well, here was, if you are somebody who works in finance and you would like to leave finance and go and work in tech, I did that. And I could say, without overstating it, here is what I did. And here's a story about what I did. And for someone somewhere, it might be useful because it might be more than they have if they don't have anybody in their network that they can ask those questions. And so a lot of what you see on Substack, it will be people who are, especially a lot in this sort of community of the meta Substack community, where it's people, Substack writers writing about Substack, which always exists everywhere. On Medium, they were always writing about Medium, right? Yep. On Twitter, people are always like, why am I shadow banned? There's always this thread of people writing about writing or writing about the platform itself. Yes. And so I think within that community, there are people who have not been doing it a long time. Sometimes people who've been doing it a long time, they're super successful and have assistants and they're making all this money. They're so deep in the weeds that you have to yank them back. But I think often it's interesting to hear about what people's experience on a given platform has been, and it's useful even if they are not masters of the universe quite yet. It's just if they are a couple of steps ahead. Just like whose advice are you going to take, or who are you going to find interesting? If somebody is saying sort of, here's how I did so far, that can be a really fascinating and compelling. So yeah, going back to Nicholas Cole and Dickie Bush, they give a lot of this thread of advice where they are trying to get, they have a course they offer, they are trying to get people to write, and they emphasize, number one, you don't have to be this world-class PhD expert in order to talk about what you're doing. It still is going to be something worth putting out into the world, and you are worthy. And number two, be consistent and try to do something every day. So like, yet again, we're back to the advice that makes people roll their eyes because it's obvious, but sometimes the obvious stuff is what works best.
That's great. Okay, so last question. Thank you for your time. This has been a lot of fun.
For sure.
So, and maybe this is kind of a silly question, but when people created YouTube, nobody ever envisioned YouTuber as a word, right? Instagrammer as a word, this concept of influencers. Is Substack wanting people to become Substackers? And if so, like, what, is that the next step? And if so, what does that look like? Like, what is a successful Substacker? What's the pinnacle of achievement there? That's
such a great question. You know what? I was just Googling. I read a book about YouTube that I wanted to mention. I think it was called Like, Share, and Subscribe, something like that. But I read a book. I was on a vacation a while back, and it was about just what you mentioned, the genesis of YouTube. And the original idea of YouTube was not we're going to be the world's place to post video. It was originally going to be a dating site, and they had all these different ideas. And then it developed into the idea of a YouTuber. And what I liked about the book, reading it from the point of view of somebody working for a company that is a platform, was how, number one, how many slings and arrows they had of scandals and setbacks. That's good to read because you realize it was not all a flawless trajectory of success.
Right.
And then the second thing of how they shifted and changed. And they went through a period of time when they started to compensate creators much more and share much more with the creators were making. And that was the advent of somebody who would focus their life on, okay, I'm going to focus on YouTube and make a career and just be a YouTuber. Going back to Medium, I don't know that that's something Medium ever fully did. There are people, we mentioned Tim Denning early in this conversation. He had a tremendous career on Medium. He focuses on Substack now. If you have too many pivots and too many changes, it doesn't really work. And Mediumer isn't something that evolved, but YouTuber is. So
Right.
I think with Substack, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, like you can be on Substack and you don't have to have the Substack logo, obviously, placed on your publication. You are a Substacker, but only if you choose to identify yourself that way. You could completely just say, Substack is my platform, but like Mehdi Hasan has a media empire and it's called Zateo. And he has guest people who come in, he has employees. He doesn't have to say, I'm a Substacker, but he might if he gets enough of a good experience off being on Substack, because Substack is not a marriage and you're not tied forever. People have to stay happy in order to stay on Substack. So I think as Substack ourselves, I think our conception is we are making something, and a Substacker in our mind is somebody they are using whatever aspects of the platform and the tool and the network that are the most useful for them. They might be only writing. They might be only podcasting. Maybe in the future that there aren't too many Substack that are only posting pictures, but there are some art and fashion ones that are really leaning into a lot visual. So whatever they want to use the tool for, they are using it, and they are having an independent income based off that nobody can ever take away from them. And they are happy, they are growing, they are thriving. We have a good relationship together because they're choosing to stay very evolved and engaged. And I think over the 7 years of Substack, there has developed like quite a cohort of people who are that and are making their money off it. And we haven't seen that people say, okay, I'm making X amount of dollars, and now to heck with Substack, I'm going to go off and go somewhere where it's that it has some different kind of combination of features or create my own stack from scratch. In general, they haven't. And I think that's because we are trying to be better and better at fulfilling the promise of, we will help people find you, we will aid in discovery, and we will bring you new audiences while not breaking the promise that you're going to have total control of your publication. So I think, the concept of Substacker is very much, it's probably more defined by what the writers, creators, podcasters want it to be. And you don't have to identify that way, or you don't have to like celebrate Substack by any means whatsoever. You can also just like use it as a tool. And we're delighted by that too.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, I'm very excited for, again, I'm in 7 months. So who knows what happens at the end of the year, or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, but it's been a great journey so far. I've had a lot of fun. I've enjoyed, learning about Substack here on this conversation, but it's a great platform and I'm going to keep using it. And I encourage other people to do the same. Where can people find you on Substack?
So the best way to talk to me is on Substack Notes, and my handle on the app or on Notes or on Substack in general is @Linda. So if you go to substack.com / and then the @ symbol and then Linda, you're going to find me, the first Linda on Substack, I guess. So Notes is, for people who might not be familiar, Notes is very similar to Twitter /X, where it is a short form posting surface. But beyond that, it's very different than Twitter /X because, number one, there are no ads. And number two, it is really built on top of this big ecosystem we've been talking about of people having their own independent Substacks. But it is really a cool place to interact. I find that people will, if they have a product idea for Substack, they will tag the Substack employees that they kind of know. This is also cool that you feel like you know people at Substack, right? They'll tag Chris Best, or they'll tag Hamish, or they'll tag Linda. Some people might think that I'm more important at Substack than I am if they see my name a lot. I am just an employee, but you can tag the founders, you can tag me. And if you tag me on something, I will pass it along. If you tag me on a question, I'll try to answer it. So I think that's really, I had somebody ask the other day, I was in a webinar for something, and a writer was like, you guys, have you thought about making a forum, like a Slack community or something where all the writers can connect with each other? I said, well, that exists, and it's called Substack Notes. So we really want Notes to be the place. And right now, there are readers and writers in Notes. Definitely, like when you look visually in terms of the what comes up a lot, it will be a lot it's the writers. But I can tell you, like, I see the data, there are a lot of people who are reading and following along on Notes who may not be posting, but they're there. So it's a great place to self-promote. And yeah, it's a great place to bug Substack employees about features that you want built, whatever they are. So that's what I'd really recommend if people want to chat.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. If you have complaints, send them all to Linda at Substack on Substack
all the
Notes.
Complaints, just no cursing. If you're upset, just say it with an emoji.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for letting me on the platform and letting people like me on the platform without a significant following at all, and just get our start and see where it goes.
Well, thank you for being on the platform, Ron, and thank you for being an evangelist of Substack, because the way that Substack grows is not by employees of Substack talking about it. It's by people who use it. And just like how you found out about it, it is word of mouth and people saying, hey, this is something you should try. And it's a very lightweight pitch, and it's a very lightweight onboarding. And I think that's how more and more people are going to come. So thanks for the awesome questions. This was a different conversation than I often have when I've been going on podcasts because of your background. So I learned from it. I enjoyed talking about SEO and some of these factors. So thank you too. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Great to chat. And I'll see you on Substack Notes.
Okay, super. Take care.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Micron, a one-man podcast about... Okay, you know what? I'm not going to do the old outro. It takes too much time, so here's a new one. Yes, this show is all about living, learning, and the people I've met, blah, 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 blah. Long story short, I have a mic, and I'm Ron. Get it? Micron. It's pretty simple. These episodes are still recorded here in my office in the scorching heat of the Sonoran Desert in Arizona, but a few months ago, a Hispanic barbershop school moved in next door, so I'm constantly hearing loud mariachi music and Chicano rap with a wild, thumping bass that makes it hard to focus. You may even be able to hear it in the background right now. Anyway, connect with me on Substack. Just visit micron.fm online and follow me there. That's where I'm doing a lot of writing. And now I'm adding new podcast episodes. So if you want to comment or give feedback or follow or whatever, fine. Just go to micron.fm and that's where everything is. Okay? Good. Oh, yeah. I think it's time for a new tagline too. How's this? A man, a plan, a canal, Micron. Good? Boy, I'm feeling feisty today. Thanks for listening. Bum ba ba da dunk bum bum bum